The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong in Bramblewood came when widow Prudence Ashworth woke one October morning with no memory of her husband's name, though she could still feel the weight of 43 years of marriage pressing against her chest like a stone she couldn't lift. And when she looked in her bedroom mirror, she swore she saw a child's face staring back at her from behind her own reflection. The autumn of 1854 had settled over the Connecticut Valley town with unusual intensity, bringing mists that clung to the streets well past dawn, and shadows that seemed to pool in corners where shadows had no business gathering. Bramblewood sat nestled between two ridges, like a secret kept by the hills themselves, connected to the outside world by a single winding road that merchants and travelers often claimed they had difficulty finding, even when they carried detailed maps and clear directions. Dr. Silas Thornbury had established his practice in Bramblewood 12 years earlier, drawn by the town's reputation for quiet prosperity and the promise of a simple life ministering to farmers, millers, and the occasional logging crew that worked the surrounding forests. But the cases that began appearing on his examination table during that strange autumn challenged every principle of medical science he had learned during his training at Yale College, and left him with the growing certainty that something was hunting his patients from inside their own minds. Mrs. Ashworth arrived at his office on a crisp Tuesday morning, her face bearing the confused expression of someone who had awakened in a house that felt familiar yet foreign. She could remember every detail of her daily routines, could navigate her kitchen with practiced ease, and recognized every neighbor who greeted her on the street. But when she tried to recall her late husband's name, her mind encountered a smooth, blank space, where 43 years of shared memories should have resided. And worse still, she claimed that every mirror in her house now showed glimpses of children's faces watching her from impossible angles. Have you ever looked in a mirror and seen something that shouldn't have been there, even for just a split second? Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and share any experiences you've had with reflections that seem to show more than they should. It's as if someone reached into my mind and plucked out every memory connected to Jeremiah, she told Dr. Thornbury, though even as she spoke his name it felt strange and unfamiliar on her tongue. I can remember our wedding day clearly, the dress I wore, the flowers we carried, the taste of the cake we shared. But the man standing beside me in those memories has no face, no voice, no substance. He's become a shadow wearing clothes. And the children in the mirrors, they watch me with such hungry eyes, as if they're waiting for something. Dr. Thornbury conducted a thorough examination, testing Mrs. Ashworth's memory with questions about current events, distant childhood experiences, and detailed knowledge of household management. Her responses revealed a mind that functioned with perfect clarity in every area except those touching upon her deceased husband. The selective nature of her memory loss defied every known pattern of mental deterioration or physical injury, and her claims about the mirror sightings suggested either hallucination or something far more disturbing. More troubling still was Mrs. Ashworth's description of how the memories had disappeared. She claimed to have awakened in the middle of the night to find her bedroom filled with soft whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The voices belonged to children, she insisted, though she could not explain how she knew this with such certainty. They had spoken in hushed tones about treasures and trades, about collections that needed to be completed and gaps that needed to be filled, and they had called her by name, though she lived alone and had locked all her doors before retiring. When Dr. Thornbury pressed her for more details about this experience, Mrs. Ashworth's expression grew distant and troubled. They knew things about Jeremiah that no living soul should have known, she said quietly. Secret things, private moments between husband and wife that we never shared with anyone. And they spoke of these memories as if they were coins to be counted, objects to be examined and evaluated for their worth. But the strangest part was that I could see them sometimes, just at the edge of my vision. Small figures standing in corners, sitting on furniture, always watching, always waiting. The physician documented Mrs. Ashworth's case with careful attention to detail, but privately attributed her experience to the natural effects of grief combined with the peculiar loneliness that often afflicted widows during the darker months of the year. He prescribed mild sedatives and recommended that she seek comfort in the company of friends and family members who could help her maintain connection to her normal routines. But Mrs. Ashworth's visit proved to be only the beginning of a pattern that would soon encompass the entire town and force Dr. Thornbury to confront the possibility that Bramblewood had become the hunting ground for something that existed beyond the boundaries of medical science or rational explanation. Within 3 days, 5 more residents appeared at Dr. Thornbury's office with complaints of missing memories, not the gradual fade of normal forgetting, but the complete and sudden absence of specific recollections that had been vivid and accessible just days before. Each patient described the same unsettling phenomena: whispered voices in the night, glimpses of watching children that vanished when looked at directly, and the systematic removal of their most treasured memories with surgical precision. Augustus Fletcher, the town's most prosperous grain merchant, discovered that he could no longer remember his first business transaction, the moment of triumph that had launched his successful career. When he tried to access that crucial recollection, he found only an empty space where detailed knowledge of negotiations, profits, and the sweet taste of victory had once resided. But more disturbing was his report that his office windows now reflected faces that weren't there. Children pressed against the glass from the inside, their breath fogging the panes even though his building was locked and empty after hours. Schoolmistress Lydia Beaumont reported that she had lost all memory of her graduation ceremony from the Hartford Female Seminary, the achievement that had qualified her to teach and had remained a source of strength throughout her professional life. She could remember every lesson she had learned, every book she had studied, and every examination she had passed. But the moment of receiving her certificate had been cleanly excised from her mind as if it had never occurred. She also claimed that the school's mirrors had begun showing her classroom filled with additional students, pale children who sat perfectly still and watched her with unblinking eyes, though when she turned to look directly at where they should have been sitting, she saw only empty desks. Most unsettling was young Timothy Holbrook, barely 7 years old, who came to Dr. Thornbury accompanied by his distraught parents. The boy claimed that he could no longer remember learning to read, though his literacy skills remained perfectly intact. The moment of breakthrough, when letters had transformed from meaningless marks into words filled with meaning and possibility, had vanished completely from his consciousness. But Timothy also insisted that his bedroom mirror had become a window, that he could see through it into other rooms, other houses, where children sat in circles around glowing objects that looked like captured fireflies, passing them back and forth, while whispering secrets he couldn't quite understand. Dr. Thornbury began maintaining detailed records of these cases, noting patterns that disturbed him more deeply with each new patient. The missing memories were never random or meaningless. They were invariably recollections that held particular emotional significance for their original owners. Moments of triumph, love, achievement, or profound happiness were being selectively removed, while ordinary daily experiences remained untouched. And in each case, the patients reported the same secondary phenomena: glimpses of watching children, reflections that showed impossible scenes, and the growing sense that their most private moments were being observed and evaluated by unseen intelligences. The first physical evidence appeared when Dr. Thornbury was examining Mrs. Fletcher, Augustus's wife, who had come to complain of missing memories related to her children's births. As she described her symptoms, the physician noticed that frost was forming on the examination room windows, despite the mild October weather outside. When he approached the window to investigate, he saw what appeared to be small handprints pressed against the glass from the outside. But the examination room was on the second floor of his building, with no balcony or ledge that could support a person. As Dr. Thornbury stared at the handprints, they began to multiply. More and more tiny palms pressed against the window, creating a pattern that suggested a crowd of children had somehow managed to scale the building's exterior wall and were now clinging to the glass like insects. The handprints appeared and disappeared in waves, as if the invisible children were taking turns pressing against the window to peer inside. Mrs. Fletcher seemed unaware of this phenomenon, continuing to describe her symptoms while the supernatural activity intensified around her. But Dr. Thornbury noticed that as the handprints multiplied, her voice grew softer and more distant, as if she were gradually falling asleep while still maintaining the appearance of wakefulness. Her eyes took on a glassy quality, and her responses to his questions became increasingly mechanical and emotionless. The physician realized with growing alarm that he was witnessing the memory theft in progress. The invisible children were somehow using their proximity to the window to influence Mrs. Fletcher's mental state, gradually drawing her into a trance-like condition that would allow them to access and remove her precious recollections. The handprints on the glass were not random touches but deliberate positioning, as if the entities were working together to create some form of supernatural apparatus for penetrating human consciousness. Dr. Thornbury immediately moved Mrs. Fletcher away from the window and into an interior room without any reflective surfaces. The change in location seemed to break whatever spell had been affecting her, and she returned to full alertness with no memory of having entered the altered state. But when they returned to the examination room, the handprints had vanished from the window, leaving behind only a thin layer of frost that melted quickly in the afternoon sunlight. The incident convinced Dr. Thornbury that Bramblewood was facing a genuine supernatural threat, rather than a series of unrelated medical curiosities. The memory thieves were not mythical creatures or products of overactive imagination. They were real entities with the ability to influence human consciousness and steal precious recollections with systematic precision. Their invisible nature and apparent immunity to physical barriers made them nearly impossible to defend against, and their growing boldness suggested that they were becoming more confident in their activities. The physician began taking precautions in his own home, covering all mirrors and reflective surfaces, closing curtains during evening hours, and maintaining oil lamps burning throughout the night to prevent the deep darkness that seemed to facilitate the children's activities. But these measures provided only limited protection, as he soon discovered that the entities could manifest through any surface that might cast a reflection. Windows, polished metal instruments, even pools of standing water. Dr. Thornbury's first direct encounter with the memory thieves occurred on a moonless night in early November when he was returning home late from treating a patient with pneumonia. As he walked down Bramblewood's main street, he noticed that the windows of every house were glowing with a soft, otherworldly light that seemed to emanate from within the glass itself, rather than from any artificial illumination inside the buildings. Looking more closely, he could see that each glowing window contained the silhouettes of children, dozens of them, sitting in circles and engaged in activities that resembled games, but possessed an intensity that suggested profound significance. The shadowy figures passed objects back and forth with careful ceremony, examining each item with the attention of collectors evaluating precious acquisitions. As Dr. Thornbury watched this impossible scene, one of the children turned toward him and raised a small hand in what might have been a greeting or warning. The gesture was followed by a chorus of whispers that seemed to emerge from every reflective surface in the vicinity. Windows, puddles, the polished brass fittings on doors and gates. The voices spoke in unison, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying in its otherworldly perfection. "Dr. Silas Thornbury," they said, and hearing his full name pronounced by the supernatural chorus sent ice through his veins. "We have been watching your memories with great interest. You possess such fascinating recollections of healing and hope, moments when you realized you had the power to preserve life and ease suffering. We would be honored to add these experiences to our collection, where they would be treasured forever." The physician felt a strange tugging sensation in his mind, as if invisible fingers were probing through his thoughts and evaluating his most precious professional memories. The sensation was not painful, but it filled him with profound unease as he realized that the memory thieves could access his consciousness from a distance without requiring physical proximity or the trance-like state he had observed in their other victims. "We offer a fair trade," the voices continued. their tone taking on the persuasive quality of merchants attempting to close a beneficial transaction. Your memories of success and satisfaction in exchange for peace from the burden of caring for others. No more sleepless nights worrying about patients. No more guilt when your efforts fail to save those beyond help. We can free you from the weight of responsibility and give you the tranquil existence that so many find preferable to the constant struggle of professional duty. Dr. Thornbury forced himself to focus on the most traumatic memory he possessed: the death of his younger sister during childhood, a recollection filled with grief and helplessness that had driven his determination to pursue medicine. The deliberate offering of this painful experience seemed to confuse the memory thieves, and their collective whisper faltered as they encountered emotions they were not prepared to process. Using this moment of confusion, Dr. Thornbury hurried toward his house, but the supernatural voices followed him through the darkness, speaking with increasing urgency about the inevitability of their success and the futility of resistance. They described in precise detail other communities they had visited, towns where every resident had eventually surrendered their precious memories in exchange for the peaceful emptiness that made daily existence so much simpler. "Bramblewood will join our collection," they promised as he reached his front door. "Every beautiful memory, every moment of joy and love and triumph, will be preserved in our treasure rooms where time cannot fade them or death destroy them. Your neighbors are already beginning to understand the wisdom of our offer. Soon you will be the only person in town who still carries the burden of caring about anything beyond basic survival." Dr. Thornbury barricaded himself inside his house, but the children's voices penetrated even there, whispering through keyholes and emerging from the surfaces of medical instruments that had been polished to mirror brightness. They knew intimate details about his personal life, his professional struggles, his private doubts and fears. Their knowledge suggested they had been observing him for an extended period, cataloging his experiences and evaluating their potential worth. As the night progressed, the supernatural voices began describing changes they claimed to observe in other Bramblewood residents. Families were becoming more efficient in their daily routines, they reported, freed from the distractions of sentimental attachment and emotional investment. Children were focusing more intently on practical skills rather than wasting time on imaginative play or personal friendships. Adults were conducting their business with mathematical precision, unencumbered by considerations of loyalty, affection, or moral obligation. Dr. Thornbury realized that these descriptions represented the memory thieves' vision of an ideal community, a town full of people who possessed all their practical knowledge and physical capabilities, but had been stripped of everything that made human existence meaningful beyond mere survival. Such a community would be highly efficient, but completely hollow, populated by individuals who functioned like sophisticated machines rather than living beings capable of love, joy, and creative expression. The physician understood that he was witnessing the implementation of a long-term plan that extended far beyond simple theft. The memory thieves were systematically converting Bramblewood into a model community that would demonstrate the benefits of their services to other towns in the region. Once the transformation was complete, they would use Bramblewood as a showcase to attract new victims, gradually spreading their influence across the entire Connecticut Valley. But Dr. Thornbury's analysis was interrupted by a discovery that sent new waves of terror through his already overwrought consciousness. Looking out his bedroom window, he saw that the night sky above Bramblewood was filled with lights, not stars, but glowing orbs that moved in deliberate patterns and seemed to pulse with the same otherworldly radiance he had observed in the windows throughout town. The lights were descending toward Bramblewood in organized formations, suggesting that the memory thieves were not merely a local phenomenon, but part of a much larger supernatural network. Additional entities were arriving to assist with the harvest, bringing with them resources and capabilities that would make resistance even more futile than Dr. Thornbury had initially realized. As he watched the light settle onto rooftops and trees throughout the town, Dr. Thornbury began to hear new voices joining the supernatural chorus, older voices that spoke with the authority of experienced leaders addressing subordinates. These entities discussed Bramblewood's residents with the clinical detachment of professionals evaluating livestock, categorizing individuals according to the quality and quantity of memories they possessed. "The schoolmistress has excellent educational recollections," observed one voice with the tone of an appraiser examining valuable merchandise. "Her graduation ceremony was particularly rich in hope and achievement. The merchant's first successful transaction contains layers of ambition and satisfaction that will complement our collection beautifully. And the physician, his memories of saving lives possess a purity of purpose that makes them extremely valuable for trade with entities who appreciate such rarities." Dr. Thornbury realized that the memory thieves operated according to a complex economy based on the exchange of stolen human experiences. Different types of memories held different values in their supernatural marketplace, and they traded these recollections among themselves like merchants dealing in precious commodities. Bramblewood was being systematically plundered not just for the local benefit of its immediate attackers, but to supply a vast network of entities who had built their entire existence around the consumption of human emotional experiences. The discovery that his town had become a supplier in this grotesque commerce filled Dr. Thornbury with rage and determination that temporarily overcame his fear. He began formulating desperate plans for warning other communities or finding some way to disrupt the memory thieves' operations. But his planning was interrupted by sounds that suggested the final phase of Bramblewood's destruction was about to begin. Throughout the town, doors were opening and residents were emerging from their houses despite the late hour. Dr. Thornbury could see his neighbors walking with the slow, measured steps of people in trance-like states, converging on the town square where the supernatural lights had concentrated into a brilliant display that illuminated the entire area with otherworldly radiance. Men, women, and children moved through the streets with expressions of peaceful surrender, their faces reflecting the same serene emptiness that Dr. Thornbury had observed in his most severely affected patients. They carried no possessions and showed no awareness of their surroundings, focused entirely on reaching the gathering point where the memory thieves waited to complete their harvest. Dr. Thornbury watched in horror as his entire community prepared to surrender their remaining precious memories in a single coordinated ceremony. The systematic nature of this final collection suggested that the memory thieves had been building toward this moment throughout their entire campaign, gradually weakening their victims' resistance before gathering them together for the ultimate plundering of their consciousness. The physician realized that he was probably the only person in Bramblewood who retained enough awareness to understand what was happening. His medical training and natural skepticism had provided some protection against the memory thieves' influence, but he could feel that protection weakening as the supernatural forces concentrated their attention on the town square. As Dr. Thornbury struggled to decide whether to attempt a futile rescue or preserve himself as a witness to Bramblewood's destruction, he made a discovery that changed everything he thought he understood about the situation. Hidden in his medical bag, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture, was a hand-drawn map of the Connecticut Valley that showed the locations of dozens of communities throughout the region. But this was not a map he remembered creating or acquiring. The drawing style was childish, as if created by someone with limited artistic ability, and many of the town names were misspelled in ways that suggested they had been written by someone who had heard the words spoken but never seen them in print. Most disturbing of all, several communities were marked with symbols that Dr. Thornbury gradually recognized as indicating the completion of memory harvests. The map provided evidence that Bramblewood was not the first community to be targeted by the memory thieves, and it suggested that Dr. Thornbury himself might not be the innocent victim he had believed. The childish handwriting and primitive drawing style indicated that the map had been created by one of the supernatural entities, but its presence in his medical bag implied a connection between the physician and the memory thieves that he could not remember forming. As Dr. Thornbury studied the mysterious map, fragments of impossible memories began surfacing in his consciousness. Recollections of conversations with invisible children, agreements made during trance-like states, and participation in activities that his rational mind insisted could not have occurred. These recovered memories suggested that he had been collaborating with the memory thieves for months. providing them with detailed information about Bramblewood's residents and helping them identify the most valuable targets for their collection efforts. The realization that he might be complicit in his community's destruction, rather than its potential savior, sent Dr. Thornbury into a state of psychological crisis that made him question every aspect of his recent experiences. If he could not trust his own memories, how could he be certain that anything he believed about the situation was accurate? The memory thieves' ability to manipulate human consciousness might extend far beyond simple theft. They might be capable of implanting false recollections, altering existing memories, or creating elaborate illusions that made their victims believe they were experiencing events that had never actually occurred. The possibility that his entire perception of the crisis might be artificially constructed filled Dr. Thornbury with a despair so profound that when the children's lullaby began echoing through Bramblewood for what he sensed would be the final time, he found himself no longer possessing the strength or clarity to resist its otherworldly influence. As consciousness faded, and the supernatural song drew him toward the town square where his neighbors waited in silent formation, Dr. Thornbury's last coherent thought was a prayer that someone, somewhere, would eventually find the hidden map and understand its significance before the memory thieves completed their expansion throughout the Connecticut Valley. But even as he surrendered to the lullaby's irresistible pull, Dr. Thornbury could not shake the growing suspicion that the map had been placed in his bag not by accident or supernatural manipulation, but by his own hand, and that his role in Bramblewood's destruction might be far more central than he had ever dared to imagine. The next morning, travelers passing through the Connecticut Valley would find Bramblewood exactly as it had always appeared, a prosperous farming community where residents went about their daily business with quiet efficiency and showed no interest in discussing their personal lives or local history with strangers. But careful observers might notice that the town's children seemed unusually mature for their ages, watching adult visitors with calculating eyes and whispering among themselves in languages that sounded almost familiar, but remained tantalizingly beyond comprehension. And in houses throughout Bramblewood, mirrors would occasionally show reflections that didn't quite match reality. Glimpses of rooms filled with glowing orbs, children sitting in circles around treasures that sparkled like captured starlight, and maps marked with symbols indicating communities throughout New England, where the harvest of human memory was scheduled to begin. If this spine-chilling tale of stolen memories and hidden complicity gave you goosebumps, smash that like button and subscribe for more terrifying historical mysteries. Drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from and whether you've ever questioned your own memories or found evidence of things you couldn't remember doing. Your stories might just become our next bone-chilling video.